The timestamp read 2:30 p.m. when David Miller hit send on what would become the most haunting photograph in Ohio industrial history. The image, grainy and poorly lit, showed something that shouldn't have been there, something that would lead investigators down a rabbit hole 40 feet into the earth, where secrets lay buried in darkness. What David captured in that final photo would puzzle investigators for weeks. But it wasn't until a high-tech drone descended into the forgotten depths of an abandoned shaft that the true horror of his disappearance would finally come to light. If you're new to our channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because today's case will take you through one of the most perplexing industrial disappearances in recent memory, where cutting-edge technology revealed answers that no one saw coming. This is the story of a young man whose life was as methodical as the machinery he operated, whose daily routine was as predictable as clockwork, until 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, when everything changed forever. What happened in those crucial minutes between his last text message and the moment his co-workers realized he was gone? And what secret was hidden so deep underground that it took a drone to uncover the truth? The answers will shock you. But first, you need to know exactly who David Miller was, because understanding his life is the only way to comprehend how impossible his disappearance truly seemed. David Miller was the kind of person who commanded respect without ever demanding it, and at 32 years old, he had already carved out a reputation as one of the most reliable maintenance supervisors at Riverside Chemical Plant in Youngstown, Ohio. Standing 6'2" with sandy brown hair that he kept neatly trimmed and steel blue eyes that seemed to notice every detail, David had the kind of calm presence that made everyone feel safer when he was around. His colleagues often said that David could fix anything, and in his 8 years at the plant, he had proven that assessment correct time and again. Whether it was a complex pump failure at 3 a.m. or a mysterious electrical issue that had stumped the day shift, David approached every problem with the same methodical precision that had made him indispensable to plant operations. David was the guy you called when nobody else could figure it out, recalls Jennifer Thompson, the plant's operations manager. He had this incredible ability to look at a broken system and immediately understand not just what was wrong, but why it had failed. Most importantly, he could explain it in a way that made sense to everyone else. David's dedication to his job stemmed from a deep sense of responsibility that had been instilled in him from childhood. Growing up in a working-class family in nearby Warren, Ohio, he had learned early that steady, honest work was the foundation of a good life. His father had worked in steel mills for 30 years before they closed down, and David had witnessed firsthand the devastation that job loss could bring to a community. David always said he wanted to be the kind of worker that companies could count on. His mother, Carol Miller, remembers with pride. He took his responsibilities seriously because he knew that other people's livelihoods depended on the plant running smoothly. That sense of responsibility extended beyond his professional life. David lived in a modest, 3-bedroom house on Pine Street that he had purchased 3 years earlier, and he took meticulous care of both the property and his relationships with neighbors. Every Saturday morning, you could find him in his driveway, washing his 2018 Ford F-150 pickup truck, or working on small home improvement projects. David's daily routine reflected the same precision he brought to his work. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he would wake up and immediately check his phone for any overnight alerts from the plant's monitoring systems. His girlfriend of 4 years, Sarah Rodriguez, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital, had learned to expect a quick good morning text before David's feet even hit the floor. By 6:00 a.m., David would be at Tony's coffee shop on Market Street, where he had the same breakfast every workday: black coffee, wheat toast, and scrambled eggs. The owner, Tony Ricci, knew David's order by heart and would often have it ready before David even walked through the door. David was one of those customers who became like family, Tony recalls. Always polite, always asked about my wife's arthritis, always left a good tip even though he didn't have to. He was just a genuinely good guy. At work, David was known for his habit of documenting everything with his phone camera. As a maintenance supervisor, he had developed a practice of photographing equipment conditions, repair work in progress, and safety concerns. His phone contained thousands of images related to plant operations, and his detailed photo logs had helped prevent several major equipment failures over the years. David's photos saved us millions of dollars, explains plant manager Robert Anderson. He would spot wear patterns or corrosion that our regular inspections missed. His documentation was so thorough that we started using his methods as standard practice for the entire maintenance department. This constant documentation would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. Because on Tuesday, March 15th, 2023, David's habit of photographing everything around him would capture something that shouldn't have been there. Something that would haunt investigators for months to come. But that Tuesday morning started like any other, with David following his precise routine, completely unaware that he was living through his final normal day. He arrived at the plant at exactly 6:45 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to begin what he thought would be just another shift. He had no way of knowing that by 2:30 p.m. his entire world would change forever. And he certainly couldn't have predicted that the photo he would take at that exact moment would become the most important piece of evidence in one of Ohio's most baffling industrial disappearances. The question that would torment everyone who knew David was simple. How does someone so methodical, so careful, so connected to the people around him, simply vanish, without a trace in the middle of a workday? The answer lay 40 feet underground, in a place that logic said he never could have reached alive. But David Miller was about to prove that sometimes the impossible becomes terrifyingly real. Tuesday, March 15th, 2023, dawned gray and cold in Youngstown, Ohio. The temperature hovered at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, with a persistent drizzle that made the industrial landscape look even more forbidding than usual. David arrived at Riverside Chemical Plant at exactly 6:45 a.m., as he had done every workday for the past 8 years. The security camera footage shows him waving cheerfully to guard Marcus Johnson as he badged in through the main entrance. Same as always, Marcus would later tell investigators. Big smile, coffee cup in hand. He asked about my daughter's college applications. That was David. Even on a dreary morning like that, he always made time for other people. David's shift began in the maintenance department, where he supervised a team of 6 technicians responsible for keeping the plant's complex systems running smoothly. His first task was always the same: a comprehensive review of overnight alerts and equipment status reports that took exactly 30 minutes to complete. The digital logs show that David began this routine at 7:00 a.m., right on schedule. For the first 7 hours of his shift, everything proceeded normally. David conducted his morning team briefing, supervised routine maintenance on the primary cooling system, and completed 2 emergency repairs that had been flagged by the night shift. At 10:30 a.m., he took his scheduled break and sent his girlfriend Sarah the usual mid-morning text. Coffee break. Busy day, but everything running smooth. Love you. Along with this message, he sent a selfie showing him giving a thumbs up in front of the maintenance workshop. At 12:00 p.m., David took his lunch break in the company cafeteria. Security footage shows him sitting at his usual table near the windows, eating a sandwich he had brought from home while reviewing technical manuals on his tablet. He was joined by his friend and fellow supervisor, Kevin Anderson, and the two men appeared to be discussing weekend plans for a fishing trip. "We were talking about heading up to Lake Erie on Saturday," Kevin recalls, his voice still heavy with emotion. David had found this new spot that was supposed to be great for walleye. He was excited about trying out some new lures he'd bought. It was such a normal conversation. We were joking about who would catch the biggest fish. After lunch, David returned to the maintenance department at exactly 1:00 p.m. The afternoon's primary task was a scheduled inspection of the auxiliary equipment storage area, a section of the plant that housed older machinery and backup systems dating back to the facility's original construction in 1987. David had been assigned to evaluate whether some of the older equipment could be safely decommissioned to make room for new installations. At 2:15 p.m., David began his inspection of the auxiliary storage area. This section of the plant was rarely accessed during normal operations, and the equipment housed there hadn't been used in over a decade. David's job was to photograph each piece of machinery, assess its condition, and make recommendations about disposal or continued storage. But it was at 2:25 p.m. that David noticed something unusual. According to the digital timestamp on his phone, he had been methodically documenting the old equipment when he stopped suddenly near what appeared to be a newer addition to the storage area. Through the grimy window of what should have been an empty section, he observed something that didn't belong. The photograph he took at exactly 2:30 p.m. shows a blurry image of what appears to be recent activity in a space that had supposedly been sealed off for maintenance. The photo, later enhanced by forensic specialists, reveals disturbed dust patterns on the floor, what looks like fresh footprints, and, most disturbingly, what appears to be excavation equipment that shouldn't have been there. In the corner of the image, barely visible but unmistakably present, is what looks like drilling machinery and construction materials. Modern equipment in a space that had been officially closed since 2013. More troubling, still, the photo seems to show an opening in the floor that wasn't indicated on any of the plant's architectural plans. David immediately sent this photo to 3 people: his girlfriend, Sarah, his friend Kevin Anderson, and his supervisor, Jennifer Thompson. The message he included was uncharacteristically urgent. Found something weird in old storage area. Equipment and what looks like excavation work that shouldn't be here. Going to investigate? Sarah Rodriguez was in the middle of her shift at the hospital when the message arrived, and she wouldn't see it until several hours later. Kevin Anderson was conducting equipment tests in a different part of the plant and didn't receive the message immediately. But Supervisor Jennifer Thompson received the photo and message at exactly 2:31 p.m. The moment I saw that photo, I knew David had found something significant, Jennifer remembers. David wasn't the type to get excited about nothing. If he said something was wrong, then something was definitely wrong. I immediately tried to radio him, but he didn't respond. The plant's radio logs show that Jennifer attempted to contact David at 2:33 p.m., 2:35 p.m., and again at 2:38 p.m. When he failed to respond to any of these calls, she initiated a department-wide communication check. Every other maintenance supervisor responded immediately, except David. At 2:45 p.m., Jennifer Thompson left her office and walked to David's last known location. She found the auxiliary storage area's main door standing open, with David's equipment inspection clipboard lying on a nearby workbench. His coffee cup was still warm, sitting next to his safety helmet and tablet. His identification badge was still active in the plant's tracking system, showing his last recorded location as the auxiliary storage area at 2:30 p.m. It was like he had just stepped away for a moment, Jennifer recalls. All his equipment was there, his inspection. Notes were half finished, and his radio was still clipped to his belt on the workbench. But David was nowhere to be found. A quick search of the immediate area revealed no trace of David. Jennifer then made the decision that would escalate the situation from a simple safety check to a full-scale emergency response. At 2:52 p.m., she activated the plant's emergency communication system and initiated a facility-wide search protocol. Within minutes, the search expanded to include security, personnel, maintenance staff, and volunteers from other shifts. The plant's comprehensive security camera system was immediately reviewed, but the cameras revealed a disturbing gap. While footage clearly showed David entering the auxiliary storage area at 2:15 p.m., the cameras in that specific section had been experiencing technical difficulties for the past week, a malfunction that hadn't been prioritized for repair because the area was supposedly unused. Plant manager Robert Anderson arrived on site at 3:15 p.m. and immediately contacted local law enforcement. The Youngstown Police Department dispatched officers within 10 minutes, but they quickly determined that this case required specialized expertise. The industrial setting, combined with the potential safety hazards of the chemical processing facility, meant that standard search procedures would need to be carefully modified. By 4:00 p.m., the search had expanded to include the Mahoning County Sheriff's Department and the Ohio State Bureau of Investigation. The decision was made to evacuate non-essential personnel from the facility while maintaining critical operations under skeleton crew supervision. Detective Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez, who would become the lead investigator on David's case, arrived at the plant at 4:30 p.m. She immediately recognized the unusual nature of the disappearance. In 25 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anything quite like this. Detective O. Rodriguez explains, "You had a responsible adult in a secured facility during daylight hours with multiple security measures in place. People don't just vanish from industrial plants in the middle of their shift." The first phase of the investigation focused on the most logical explanations. Had David suffered some kind of medical emergency? The search teams combed every accessible area of the facility, including maintenance tunnels, storage areas, and even the facility's extensive, underground utility corridors. They found nothing. Had David left the facility voluntarily? Security footage from all entry and exit points was reviewed in detail. The cameras showed David entering the plant at 6:45 a.m., but there was no record of him leaving. The plant's electronic badge system, which tracked employee movement through secure areas, showed David's last recorded location as the auxiliary storage area at 2:30 p.m. Could David have been injured and trapped somewhere? Emergency medical teams with specialized equipment searched every possible location where someone could become trapped or incapacitated. They checked storage tanks, utility spaces, and even the facility's water treatment areas. Again, they found nothing. As the hours stretched into evening, David's family arrived at the plant. His parents, Carol and Richard Miller, his girlfriend Sarah Rodriguez, and his younger sister Lisa gathered in the plant's conference room, their faces etched with worry and confusion. "This wasn't like David at all," Carol Miller told investigators through her tears. "He was the most responsible person I knew. He would never just disappear without telling someone where he was going. Never." Sarah Rodriguez was particularly distraught, showing investigators the photo David had sent her at 2:30 p.m. "He was always sending me pictures from work," she explained, "but this one was different. He seemed concerned, maybe even worried. And David was never worried about anything at that plant. He knew every inch of it. As night fell on March 15th, the search was temporarily suspended due to safety concerns about conducting operations in the dark around industrial equipment. David Miller had been missing for over 8 hours, and investigators had no credible leads, no witnesses to his disappearance, and no logical explanation for how someone could simply vanish from a secured facility. The mystery deepened when Detective Rodriguez and her team finally gained access to the section of the auxiliary storage area that David had photographed. Using specialized equipment to ensure the area was safe for human entry, investigators found exactly what David's photo had suggested: evidence of recent activity in a space that should have been undisturbed. The area, which had been officially sealed since 2013 due to outdated safety systems, showed clear signs that someone had been working inside. Fresh excavation equipment had been installed, including what appeared to be industrial drilling apparatus. The floor showed recent disturbance patterns, and most mysteriously, there were signs that significant digging work had been taking place. But this discovery only raised more questions. Who had been working in the area? Why was this work being conducted in secret? And most importantly, what did any of this have to do with David Miller's disappearance? The investigation was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. Because beneath the auxiliary storage area, 20 feet down through an old maintenance access shaft, lay answers that would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about the case. 3 weeks had passed since David Miller's disappearance, and the investigation had reached what Detective Rodriguez privately feared might be a dead end. The initial surge of activity had yielded little concrete evidence. The mysterious equipment in the auxiliary storage area had been thoroughly documented, but its connection to David's disappearance remained unclear. The drilling apparatus found in the area was eventually traced to Morrison Contracting Services, a subcontractor that claimed they had been hired for routine foundation inspections of the plant's older sections. However, their paperwork was incomplete, and the project manager who had allegedly authorized the work was conveniently unavailable for comment. Everything about this contractor felt wrong, Detective Rodriguez recalls. Their permits were technically valid, but they'd been filed in a way that avoided normal oversight. It was as if someone had deliberately tried to conduct this work without attracting attention. Meanwhile, David's family and friends struggled with the agonizing uncertainty. His girlfriend Sarah had taken leave from her nursing job and spent every day at the plant, hoping for any sign of progress in the investigation. Kevin Anderson had returned to work, but found it nearly impossible to concentrate, especially when he passed David's empty office. The hardest part was not knowing, Sarah explains. We kept thinking he might walk through the door at any moment with some reasonable explanation for everything. But as the days went by, that hope started to fade. The plant had returned to normal operations, but security had been significantly increased. Additional cameras were installed in previously unmonitored areas, and new protocols required all maintenance staff to work in pairs when accessing isolated sections. The auxiliary storage area remained sealed as an active crime scene. David's case had attracted media attention throughout Ohio, and several volunteer search groups had offered their assistance. However, the industrial setting limited the effectiveness of traditional search methods. The plant's management was cooperative, but they were also concerned about safety liability and the disruption to their operations. It was during the 4th week of the investigation that Detective Rodriguez made the decision that would finally break the case open. Frustrated by the limitations of ground-based searching in the industrial environment, she contacted the Ohio State Police Aviation Unit about using drone technology to search areas that human investigators couldn't safely access. We had exhausted every conventional search method, Detective Rodriguez explains. The plant was massive, with multiple levels, underground utilities, and areas that were simply too dangerous for human searchers. I kept thinking about that equipment David had photographed. If someone was doing unauthorized excavation work, there might be spaces we hadn't even considered. The drone operation was scheduled for Thursday, April 6th, exactly 3 weeks and 1 day after David's disappearance. The aircraft used was a DJI Matrice 300 RTK, equipped with high-resolution cameras and thermal imaging capabilities. The pilot, Officer James Chen from the State Police Aviation Unit, had extensive experience using drones for search and rescue operations. We planned to conduct a systematic search of the entire facility, Officer Chen recalls, starting with the areas around the auxiliary storage area where David was last seen, then expanding outward in a grid pattern. The thermal imaging would help us detect any heat signatures that might indicate human presence. The search began at 8:00 a.m. on a clear, cool morning. For the first 2 hours, the drone methodically covered the exterior areas of the plant, focusing on loading docks, parking areas, and perimeter buildings. The thermal imaging revealed normal heat patterns from operating equipment, but nothing that suggested human activity. At 10:30 a.m., Officer Chen directed the drone to the auxiliary storage area. The aerial perspective revealed details that ground-based investigators had missed. From above, it was clear that the area sat on top of what appeared to be a much larger underground structure. Historical plant diagrams confirmed that this section had originally been built over an old maintenance access shaft from the plant's original construction in 1987. When I saw the thermal readings from that area, I knew we had found something significant, Officer Chen remembers. There was a heat signature coming from approximately 40 feet underground. But as we got closer, we realized it wasn't the kind of heat signature we had hoped to find. The drone's high-resolution cameras were focused on a small opening near the rear of the auxiliary storage area. What they revealed would finally explain David Miller's disappearance, but in a way that no one had imagined possible. The cameras showed that the unauthorized excavation work had been focused on reopening the old maintenance shaft. Modern industrial equipment had been used to clear debris and install new access points. Most shocking of all, the thermal imaging clearly showed a heat signature that indicated decomposition, located exactly 40 feet down in the shaft. Detective Rodriguez was immediately notified of the discovery. Within an hour, specialized recovery teams from the Mahoning County Coroner's Office were on site with equipment designed for body recovery operations. The operation to access the shaft would require extreme caution, as the structural integrity of the 36-year-old accessway was unknown. We knew we had found David, Detective Rodriguez explains, her voice heavy with emotion. But what we didn't understand was how he had gotten down there, or why someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to hide his body in that shaft. The recovery operation began at 2:00 p.m., with teams carefully rappelling down the shaft using specialized safety equipment. The space was cramped and dark, illuminated only by powerful industrial lights that had been lowered on cables. What the recovery teams found at the bottom of the shaft would provide answers to some questions while raising entirely new ones. David Miller was dead. The medical examiner would later determine that he had died from injuries consistent with a 40-foot fall, though evidence suggested he may have been unconscious when he fell. His body had been at the bottom of the shaft for 3 weeks and 2 days. Most mysteriously, there were signs that someone had attempted to conceal the body using industrial materials. When we brought David up, "It was one of the hardest recoveries I've ever had to perform," recalls coroner Dr. Patricia Hayes, who supervised the body recovery operation. "A 40-foot fall is almost always fatal, but the evidence suggested this wasn't an accidental fall. Someone had tried to hide what happened down there." The autopsy revealed that David had suffered multiple traumatic injuries consistent with a fall from height, but there were also signs that he had been drugged before the fall occurred. Toxicology tests showed the presence of sedatives in his system that would have rendered him unconscious. The preliminary finding was that David had been murdered. The underground area where David's body was found showed clear signs of being a deliberately constructed crime scene. Someone had installed equipment to access the shaft and had attempted to conceal evidence after David's death. The setup suggested that David's murder had been planned well in advance. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. When investigators thoroughly searched the shaft and surrounding areas, they found evidence suggesting that David wasn't the first victim. The space contained personal items belonging to at least 2 other individuals, and soil analysis revealed traces of decomposed organic material that suggested other bodies had been disposed of there previously. The drilling equipment, the unauthorized access to the plant, the reopened maintenance shaft, all of it had been part of an elaborate plan to create an undetectable disposal site beneath the industrial facility. Someone had spent months, possibly years, preparing this location for a purpose that investigators were only beginning to understand. David's death had exposed what appeared to be a serial killing operation. The sophisticated nature of the underground facility indicated that the perpetrator had extensive knowledge of both the plant's layout and industrial construction techniques. More terrifyingly, the evidence suggested this had been going on for years. Detective Rodriguez now faced the daunting task of determining who had access to the plant, the expertise to construct the underground disposal site, and the motive to target David and potentially others. The investigation was about to expand in ways that would reveal connections to missing persons cases across multiple states. As David's family struggled to come to terms with the devastating news of his death, investigators worked to unravel the complex web of planning and preparation that had made his murder possible. The photo he had taken at 2:30 p.m. had ultimately led to the discovery of his body, but it had also exposed a criminal operation that was far more extensive and disturbing than anyone had imagined. The case had evolved from a missing person investigation into a murder case that would shock the entire state of Ohio. The discovery of evidence belonging to other victims suggested that David might have been the latest victim in a series of carefully planned murders. The sophisticated nature of the underground facility indicated that the perpetrator had extensive knowledge of both the plant's layout and industrial construction techniques. As David's family and friends gathered to mourn his loss, investigators worked to unravel the complex web of planning and preparation that had made his murder possible. The photo he had taken at 2:30 p.m. had ultimately led to the discovery of his body, but it had also exposed a criminal operation that was far more extensive and disturbing than anyone had imagined. The drone that had located David 40 feet underground had revealed more than just his body. It had uncovered evidence of a sophisticated criminal network that used industrial facilities to hide their crimes. The case of David Miller was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. 6 months after David Miller's body was discovered in the underground shaft, the investigation had expanded into one of the largest multi-state murder investigations in recent Ohio history. What began as a single missing person case had uncovered a serial killing operation that spanned at least 4 states and involved more than a dozen victims. The man responsible for David's death was eventually identified as Thomas Crawford, a 48-year-old maintenance engineer who had worked at Riverside Chemical Plant for over 15 years. Crawford had used his intimate knowledge of the facility and his position of trust to conduct his criminal activities without detection for nearly 4 years. Crawford was methodical in a way that was terrifying, Detective Rodriguez explains. He had spent years learning about abandoned maintenance shafts and underground spaces at industrial facilities throughout the region. David wasn't randomly chosen. He was specifically targeted because he had discovered Crawford's operation and had to be eliminated. The investigation revealed that Crawford had been operating as a serial killer for nearly 4 years. His method was always the same: identify maintenance workers or supervisors who worked alone in isolated areas, then lure them to remote locations where he could kill them and dispose of their bodies in underground spaces that he had prepared in advance. The forensic evidence painted a chilling picture of David's final moments. Crawford had apparently confronted David in the auxiliary storage area after David discovered the unauthorized excavation work. Toxicology reports showed that David had been drugged with a powerful sedative, then pushed down the 40-foot shaft while unconscious. Crawford's plan was almost perfect, explains forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Torres, who performed David's autopsy. He chose victims who worked in dangerous industrial environments where accidents were plausible. A fall down a maintenance shaft could easily be explained as a workplace accident if the body was ever discovered. Crawford had made one critical mistake that ultimately led to his capture. In his arrogance, he had kept detailed records of his crimes, including photographs and videos of his kill sites. When investigators searched his home, they found evidence linking him to missing persons cases in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. The investigation ultimately confirmed that at least 8 people had died at Crawford's hands over the years. Their deaths had been reported as missing persons cases, with their bodies disposed of in various underground locations at industrial sites where Crawford had access. The psychological evaluation of Crawford revealed an individual driven by a need for complete control and a fascination with industrial accidents. He had chosen his disposal methods not just for their effectiveness, but because he enjoyed the irony of using the victims' own workplace environments against them. Crawford saw himself as superior to his victims, explained Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the forensic psychologist who evaluated him. He took satisfaction in the fact that he could make people disappear from places where they should have been safe, surrounded by colleagues and security systems. The legal proceedings against Crawford were swift and decisive. He was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder across multiple jurisdictions. The evidence was overwhelming, including the detailed records he had kept of his crimes and forensic evidence linking him to each victim. David's case became a catalyst for changes in industrial security protocols across the country. The ease with which Crawford had operated within the facility for years exposed significant vulnerabilities in how industrial sites monitor employee activities and access to restricted areas. David's photo at 2:30 p.m. probably prevented other murders, Detective Rodriguez reflects. If he hadn't documented what he saw and shared it with others, Crawford might have continued killing for years. David's courage in investigating what he saw ultimately exposed a serial killer. Riverside Chemical Plant implemented comprehensive new security measures, including continuous monitoring of all areas, enhanced psychological evaluations for all employees with access to restricted areas, and new protocols requiring all maintenance work to be performed in pairs. Similar changes were adopted by industrial facilities nationwide. David's family established the David Miller Safety Foundation, which advocates for improved workplace security and provides resources for families of workplace violence victims. The Foundation has helped pass legislation requiring enhanced background checks and psychological evaluations for employees with access to isolated areas in industrial facilities. The case officially closed when Thomas Crawford was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He showed no remorse during his trial and maintained that his victims had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. He remains on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. The investigation into Crawford's network led to the discovery of 2 additional disposal sites, where the remains of his other victims were eventually recovered. The families of these victims finally had closure after years of uncertainty about what had happened to their loved ones. David's story became a powerful reminder of how quickly a normal workday can turn deadly, but also of the importance of trusting instincts when something seems wrong. His decision to photograph what he saw in the auxiliary storage area, despite the risk, ultimately led to the capture of a serial killer and prevented future murders. Today, a memorial garden has been planted at Riverside Chemical Plant in honor of David Miller and the other victims of Thomas Crawford. The underground shaft where David was found has been permanently sealed, but his memory lives on through the safety improvements his death helped inspire. The investigation into Thomas Crawford remains one of the most complex serial murder cases in Ohio history, a case that began with a single photograph taken at exactly 2:30 p.m. on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. David Miller's death was not in vain. His courage in documenting what he saw ultimately saved countless other lives. The timestamp may have read 2:30 p.m. when David took that photograph, but in many ways, that moment marked the beginning of the end for a serial killer who had operated in the shadows for far too long. David Miller's final act of bravery ensured that Thomas Crawford would never kill again.